Welcome back, everybody, to Federal News Network's inaugural Zero Trust Exchange. We've got three smart folks with us for the next 45 minutes from the Department of the Navy. And we're going to drill down a bit on identity, or sometimes called ICAM, as one of the key ingredients in a zero trust recipe. The Navy started a big push in that direction with a project called Naval Identity Services. And our guests for this session are Louis Copland, the Deputy CTO for the Department of the Navy, Justin Finelli, the Technical Director for the Navy Program Executive Office Digital and Enterprise Services, or just PEO Digital for short, and Curtis Parker, who's the Lead Engineer for Naval Identity Services. Thank you all for being here, and there's a lot to talk about, I think, around the broader topic of zero trust, and I think we'll definitely expand out as we go. But I do want to start with identity and go into a fair amount of detail on what you've been working on with NIS and why identity is so key here. Let me just start by throwing it open to the group and just ask the broad question of, give us some fundamental reasons why identity is so key to a zero trust implementation. Whoever wants to start.
Sure, I'll kick us off. Thanks for the opportunity. In the Department of the Navy, we do feel very strongly about this transition to zero trust and working with our DoD partners and the broader federal government in doing so. And identity is, in a lot of respects, the whole point of the transition to zero trust. It's about getting to more granular security controls, but in a way that actually enhances the user's ability to get their job done. And that's something that is very hard to do when you're only guarding the perimeters with network firewalls. It can be done, but it's not easy. When we go to identity as a perimeter, it brings in a lot of new tools, a lot of new automation, a lot of new opportunities to make real-time, dynamic, much more threat-informed decisions about who gets to see what, under what circumstances, for how long, and in what operating conditions. So it's not that the networks and the perimeters aren't there anymore. They are, and they're still important, but it's really identity that becomes the dominant factor in how we control access to information and applications.
Piggybacking off of Lewis's point, defense in depth has been around for some time, and that served us. But the walled garden has hit its limits in terms of the increase in cyber activity that we've seen over recent years, and our need to go further out. So, like Lewis said, anytime that you're not trading off between user experience and security, but you're actually improving both at the same time with enhanced data and capability, that's something that we don't see very often around these parts. So it made sense to invest. And then from a foundation perspective, we plan on seeing benefits and outcomes as a result of that foundation for a long time to come as a result of that shift.
The user experience piece of this, or as Lewis put it, enhancing the user's ability to get the job done, is probably a little bit under-discussed in this area. People tend to talk about zero trust for obvious reasons as a way to improve security, but maybe expand on that a little bit more, Lewis. What did you have in mind when you talked about this being a way to enhance user experience?
Well, what we've actually found with early efforts in this area with the Navy's flank speed Office 365 environment is that we could provide broader access to users to get into that IL5, which is for controlled unclassified information, productivity environment from devices and access points and usage patterns that were not possible before we had an identity-based conditional access program. So now we've got something that the DoD is called Flow 3, actually able to get on from my personal computer over my personal internet connection in a fully secured, no data on the device type of environment. And there's greater insight for our cyber defenders into who I am and what data I'm touching than was possible before. So now I can get to more data in more ways from more places when I need to. And rather than compromise the cyber defenders, they actually have better insight into what's going on than they did under the previous regime.
Yeah, and we should probably reset a little bit and give folks kind of a status report on where things stand, because Navy's done a lot of work on identity so far, and some of this is future state. So kind of separate out a little bit, if you could, the things that you had to do to make flank speed work as well as it has, and what's going to become the future of Naval Identity Services as you move toward a real zero trust model. where are things more broadly?
As folks know, Operation Flank Speed came in a hurry, but it was an overnight success, years in the making. So there were a lot of partnerships, and operationally, technically, and functionally to make that happen. In terms of the types of things that they had to flatten, we had outstanding partnership with DoD CIO and the CISO there, who signed off on waivers to do what we called Flow 3, to enable what Lewis was talking about, to allow personal devices. You can imagine how ecstatic folks in the reserves and other groups who don't always have clean access got as a result of that. And so those are aspects of Flank Speed that are present now. In terms of how we roll out with other features to include NIS, the consolidation of those different pieces, and looking at all of the legacy systems and how we can scale this in a way that it applies to those what we call GDIL, or those limited access environments, as well as allowing more capabilities to those personal devices, and then reuse of different infrastructure or transport. Those are avenues that we're knocking on the door of in terms of current experiments and then exercises. But to this point, those partnerships and the technical deep dives have allowed us to build up some momentum, and we're looking to use that on what Kurt's working on now, as well as some other things we have up our sleeve.
Yeah, great transition, because I did want to go to Kurt next. Kurt, can you give us a little intro into what makes up Naval Identity Services, what some of the broader goals are compared to what the Navy has done up until this point? What are all the piece parts from a technology standpoint, and what's this thing going to look like when it's quote unquote done?
Done, yeah. Done's a loaded term. So when we talk about identity, as far as we're implementing it with Navy Identity Services, well, first of all, I'll start with the problem that we experienced. Well, whenever COVID hit, we started moving over to having to be able to do some work outside of those walled gardens that we have at the office. We have a place where you know where you are, and you control the access at that spot. Whenever we had to move out to our own homes, it was discovered that getting access to some of those things is a little bit more difficult than was first anticipated. So that brings all the Flank Speed group and all the technologies that they're doing. Now with the identity, we discovered that the identity part of the Navy, as part of necessity and as part of just the way that the Navy usually operates, a lot of walled gardens and silos for user information are purposely built or purpose-built in various locations along the network. Navy Identity Services is working to consolidate all of this information into one authoritative source. What this is also going to do is allow us the ability to address things very quickly, because we know where a user's access and their access information is located. We aim basically to have our fingers and be able to touch all the different user stores that exist in the Navy today and consolidate them into one place. That's the first part. That's the global, I don't want to say global because it's kind of a loaded topic there, but a universal Navy identity full of directory. The next part that we have is the identity provider, which is that authenticator, a common authenticator for all of the systems out there that can support it. That would provide the ability for us to do single sign-on, so that there's not authentication for every single application out there, one after the other all day long. And also be able to very quickly support new types of authentication and new identity types of technology as they are deployed with the commercial products that we support. One last thing that we have is also that policy part. Whenever you're requesting access, people who have access in the Navy right now are very familiar with a form called the SAR-N 2875. This is the standard form used for requesting access to a system. We're digitizing that so that instead of forwarding around a PDF to various approvers, which can take a very long time, a lot longer than most people expect, We could do that within a matter of hours by doing it digitally, so that we can go out and be able to check somebody's training certificates and prompt their supervisor for an approval to an access. We're doing all this all inside one service that is global to the Navy and anybody can make use of.
And Kurt, when you talk about these walled gardens, are you really talking about differences between larger networks like NMCI and OneNet, or are they more discrete? Are there more silos than that?
There are more silos than that. Those are silos, but they are not the only silos that we have. As part of some of the Navy cloud brokers that we have out there, cloud service providers, they've actually implemented their own Active Directories in order to apply policies to machines at their locations. And as part of that, that also leads to an authentication mechanism that's located at that local Active Directory. And there are users there. Now, if somebody from an upper level source were to, let's say, leave the DoD and turn in their CAC, there's no universal method of notifying those silos that that person has actually left. Now, it's not that big a deal right now because we're all using CAC. So you disable the certificate and the CAC stops working. But when we move beyond CAC, those user accounts need to be disabled very quickly. They all need to report from a single source of truth so that we can make sure that we keep our systems as secure as possible.
And that brings me to what's probably a naive question, which something I'm never quite able to wrap my head around is, you talk about building a universal Navy directory, and doesn't the Department of Defense already have that via the Defense Manpower Data Center and the certificates that are on everybody's common access cards and individual DoD ID numbers? Talk about the difference, if you would, between the technology that's already been built going back to HSPD 12 and what you really need here.
Right. So what you're talking about is the information that's used for the public key infrastructure, PKI, and the CACs. So that is a source of identity, but it is not a complete source of identity for the usage that we need in the Navy. We actually do use from DMDC a feed of naval personnel, contractor, military, and civilians. And we use that as our authoritative source of people who exist inside the DoD. In addition to that information, in order to make access control decisions, we need the other Navy specific attributes. Like the DoD doesn't necessarily know if a person has access to the specific Navy system that provides training information, let's say, provides a training course. The DoD doesn't have that, so it has to be supplemented at the Navy. The other thing that we're also going to address with Navy Identity Services is our D-deal capabilities. Whenever a ship needs to go into a disconnected state, they have their own computer systems there. And being able to address those use cases as well, using an enterprise service that is already paid for at the Navy level, would take some of the strain off their budgets and hopefully make their lives a little bit better and more secure using the same tools that they get ashore.
So generally,
go ahead. Sorry, Justin, go ahead.
So generally speaking, there, just to piggyback, where there are joint leverage points, we're working with DISA, we're working with OSG on all of those. And we will continue to do that. They've been great partners. Where there are Navy and Marine Corps specific items like those roles, some of those change on a regular basis. And that level of dynamicism and allowing that within our networks to be not just a time driver or a source of friction, but allowing that to be a driver for being more adaptive and allowing our applications and our infrastructure to adapt to moving needs, some that are anticipated, some that are unanticipated, to include the conditions that Kurt laid out, like when you're underway, when you're a Marine Corps Marine Corpsman, pushed forward. In those situations, in those environments, There are some service specific aspects where we're building on that joint infrastructure, where we have that layer of Department of Navy infrastructure that we want to be flexible for our needs. Of course, we're sharing back those lessons learned. And when we test something, when we trailblaze something, that's something that often the Marine Corps and the Army can make use of, and vice versa. So really good partnerships and comms on that, but there are some things that are just inherently Navy and Marine Corps.
Yeah, and so Kurt talked about moving beyond the CAC. Everybody's still on the CAC right now. I think there's been a discussion for several years now about what's going to replace the Common Access Card. Do we know what the answer is at this point? It sounds like it's probably not just one thing.
But I don't know that replace is the right word necessarily. I think it's what will supplement it, what will be additional options in addition to the Common Access Card. So when we talk about multi-factor authentication, or MFA, it's really about bringing in additional authentication pathways, some of which may be richer than the Common Access Card. But that's not to say that Common Access Card gets cut off tomorrow when those MFA capabilities are in place.
So yeah, and go ahead, Kurt. Sorry.
Just to further talk about that, there are also some use cases that right now cannot be addressed with CAC. There are users that use Navy systems right now that do not have CAC cards. Navy family, Navy retirees, people like that. So we'll also be offering those types of services to Navy systems that need to address those types of use cases.
And we remember how hard it was to shift to CAC, and we know why that was necessary at the time. Wouldn't it be incredible if we had de-risked the move off of CAC and really, from a technology perspective, supplemented to Lewis's point, all the way where you could just deprecate CAC as opposed to a knife's edge cutover, which we've seen before. So that includes those hardware tokens that Kurt is alluding to, and that includes all the way up to using services across networks or other leverage capabilities, where if we show that the latency, the performance, and the access are and security are greater than as is right now, I think we have great leadership alignment to push forward on some of those actions and take an opportunity as it exists. And some of those aren't presented just by the requirements process. They're presented by disruptive technologies that we're piloting right now on top of solutions we've already rolled out.
It's all really interesting. So as part of that menu of authentication options, it sounds like there's not going to, that menu may not even be the same across DoD, because as you said, there are different use cases, service by service. So there may be some Navy or Marine Corps specific even authentication mechanisms. Is that right?
Sure, I would say so. And in addition, mission partners, industry, academia, the higher education community. So there are a lot of different, probably community-based authentication methods that are maybe not going to vary by service, but by community of users.
Great. Kurt, you mentioned this manual form that tends to get filled out today in order to get access to any particular system. You sort of touched on this a little bit, but how much of that process do we think we can automate by getting this richer data set of individuals' different attributes, so that you don't have to fill out a form every time you need any particular thing, or can we get there even?
It's a good question. Now, filling out the 2875, it's almost like a rite of passage for everybody whenever they onboard to the Navy. What we plan on doing, and what we've already gotten approved, is a workflow, which is just a series of steps that goes through our application that replaces the 2875, so that we don't even have to use the document anymore, as long as we address all the data that's in there. In our system, the workflow, if you're asking for a new piece of access, then it will launch into this workflow. And the first thing that we can show you is the first top half of the form with everything filled out, because I know your identity. You just logged into the system to ask for this access. So I know everything that my identity system knows about you. You don't have to fill that in. And then you move on through the access request. And then it goes through and asks for approvals from certain people. Now, we have discovered that there are certain pieces of data that we just don't have, or we don't have from authoritative sources, or we can't get them in a manner that is conducive for a machine to make a logical determination. Computers aren't, well, the computers that I have access to, the technology that I have access to is not very good at taking a full text narrative and making a decision for somebody's access. Clearance information right now is something that is difficult to come by from an authoritative source, but we're working on that, and we're working with other service components as well as DoD to try to find a way that we can use clearance information as part of that workflow, so we can automatically determine somebody's suitability based on that. So we'll get there. These types of efforts, and it's not Navy's not the only effort out there, but these types of efforts are showing where the data needs to be improved, the data quality needs to be improved, and where some decisions need to be made on where data needs to come from and who's going to be responsible for supplying it to not just the Navy enterprise, but the DoD enterprise.
Yeah, and since some of this sounds like it's a bit of a work in progress, I'd assume you're focusing here on building this identity services framework in a way that's extensible, so that you can build on future data elements as you get smarter about how to build in automating clearance determinations or finding information about somebody's security clearance, for example.
Yep, and that's the point. Realistically, from an infrastructure perspective, some of the inputs and some of the algorithms or decisions are going to change, but we're now setting up and doing that difficult upfront investment to make sure that we have a both scalable and dynamic platform, robust enough to take those different inputs. So from the perspective of how much are we automating right now, if you look at where we're starting, where we have hundreds of heterogeneous systems with, in a lot of cases, their own ICAM solution. The number of times that I've filled out a SAR-N form and that other Navy folks have filled out SAR-N forms, there are no efficiencies in that. Anything like that right now that we're streamlining is saving hundreds of hours and probably at scale there. But in terms of onboarding applications, so the applications within NIST and taking that, applying that to the legacy systems and scaling that onboarding is the difference between one system at a time and hundreds at a time, and moving everything into that zero trust space much quicker. Once we are done with that blocking and tackling, then that allows us a lot more focus on here return on investment capabilities, that where we can automate some of the higher order decisions, as well as from an access perspective, here's us using the full power of what NIST had intended in terms of making risk management decisions above just the rules and what we find in some of those playbooks.
So what NIST really gets to is what in Zero Trust is called the attribute-based access control, or the ABAC. And obviously, as many attributes as we can vacuum up, we want to make use of. So Zero Trust is really context hungry, and the more context we can provide, the more options we have, including leveraging machine learning techniques to get insight into that context as we mine it. But the transition to ABAC, depends on meaningful attributes. And this is one of the ways in which Zero Trust is really going to drive a dramatic shift in how we design and deliver applications, because the applications need to come back and say which attributes are meaningful. If it's a contract writing system, it needs to explain there's a difference between someone who requires a product or service and someone with a contracting warrant who's allowed to award a contract. That's not something that the SAR is going to, that 2875 is going to tell you. And likewise, when we talk about delivering things via that flow 3 that we now have with flank speed, as we get to virtual desktops and app stores that are embedded in the Zero Trust framework, that's a whole different way of delivering the application itself, that itself is embedded in Zero Trust infrastructure. So it's really the beginning of a pervasive change in how we deliver end user services.
And that's an example of technology enabling operations that we can really dance together. So the operational needs are clear, but when we have some of these leap aheads, and if we move faster, then the amount of data that we have and the types of data we have should allow us some new opportunities for, hey, this occurred because from an agile perspective, while we're doing these development sprints or these configuration sprints with the different solutions in NIST and otherwise, because we're now embedding operators in there instead of having year-old sets of requirements, more opportunities can occur. We can sprint further on that based on that data available, and we can get capabilities out faster. All of that with an emphasis on that upfront worth and getting to critical mass sooner.
I want to go back to Lewis's, one of the points Lewis just made on, which I guess I'll summarize as more attributes, more better. But do you need to temper your appetite a little bit on the number of distinct attributes that you're considering for now, while you're also working on data quality issues? Because if you ingest a whole bunch of types of attributes that actually have data that's 10 years out of date, it's probably not helping you. Or am I overstating the scope of the problem there?
I think you're correct. I mean, for my part, I look forward to having that problem of too many attributes, too many dimensions. But we're starting where we stand. So, day one is to get to where we are with our offline process in a automated, more dynamic fashion. Whenever you do a modernization effort in IT that is data driven, and you go back to the data and just read the newspaper headlines back, you tend to discover some unpleasant things. You lift up that rock and you see all those bugs, and people say, "Oh, your modernization project dumped all these bugs here." And you say, "Oh, no, I just picked up a rock. They were there the last 30 years." So we are seeing some of those things. NIST has gone live with Navy ERP, our SAP implementation, 85,000 users. And as you might expect, there have been some data collisions across the different systems. And what we've had to explain is, this is not a system problem. This is what the data show. Now, we may be holding the data to a higher fidelity than we have in the past, and being more actionable with it, being more responsive with it. So those are all fair lessons learned. But it's definitely a learning experience. It's a data hygiene issue, all those things that the CDOs are working on. And we're walking the walk right now. Kurt, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, when we talk about the attributes, one of the subjects that comes up whenever we talk about this is, why are you reaching out to all these silos? Why don't you just make them, turn around and start using your user store instead of using theirs? That's pie in the sky, and I would love to be able to tell somebody that. But let's be honest. What we're talking about is legacy systems that are a little bit older. And I will say that these systems are not still in operation because they are unimportant. It's because somebody uses them and they're going to keep them running, and they use them every day, which is why they're still around. Now, in order to bring them up to to use modern technologies like SAML assertions or open auth, then there's going to have to be a development effort. And sometimes they just don't have the budget to do that, to do it quickly. So in order to bring them underneath an ICAM service, what we can do is we can reach out and actually let our service operate on the silo. And those are the attributes that we're bringing in. Now, we can bring their attributes in, and in some of those cases, they can just immediately start using our application. But if we know what their access is over in that other silo, then when it comes time to address the user disconnects, I can reach out to that silo and disable them as well. So that allows the legacy systems to come under the umbrella of the ICAM service without making too much of a development effort right now. The end state is for them to adopt modern technologies so that we can dissolve that silo. But that may take a while, and that's going to take a development effort and a lot of and some money and maybe even hiring action to get somebody to do that type of work for you. But in the meantime, as a step, we can still bring you into the ICAM service by being able to access those attributes and know what those attributes are in our service to operate on that silo.
Is Navy ERP actually a good example of that? Because I think it's still by far the largest cloud implementation in the Department of the Navy. So running on a pretty modernized platform there. What did you learn implementing some of this stuff in Navy ERP to the extent it's relevant for deployments across the rest of the department?
We've learned quite a lot. Navy ERP is it's a very big system. It's a very complicated system, and it's very and is widely used. So what we've learned is with a system like Navy ERP, we need to have a larger representation of their stakeholders, because Navy ERP is used by commands that are scattered all over CONUS and OCONUS. So they have different ways of doing their work. And it's very hard to, enforce a workflow that goes counter to the way they've normally done their job in the past. So in the future, we'd like to have more stakeholder involvement, more people doing some testing and being involved in the requirements that we're implementing. So the Navy ERP integration is live and it's working. There are a few pain points here and there and that's what we're trying to address, are those pain points.
I'll add that digital transformations tend to succeed or fail on the basis of culture rather than the technology. And Navy ERP has a big and heterogeneous set of cultures. So whether that's a local field activities standard operating procedure for when you review those 2875s, or all the different functional communities, who they want doing what, it just was a much larger culture set to try and do a digital transformation with than if some of the other applications we have out there.
Sticking with ERP just a little bit, I almost wish we had a financial management person on with us right now, because one of the huge issues that's come up with audit so often is improperly configured access controls to financial IT systems. Have any of you thought through how much this whole enterprise has the potential to improve audit outcomes, even though you're not strictly in the FM world? I get that.
In a word, yes. Go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, what I was going to say is this entire project was the result of the fire audit. We were stood up as an ICAM service because some of the findings that came out of that the fire audit, those audit findings, could be solved by using an identity service, which is something that was not available in the Navy. So that's when we stood up with a prototype 2 years ago, Navy ERP being our integration partner at that time. And part of our requirements were specific requirements that were the audit findings. So we're here because of those, and we're here to specifically address those audit findings. So yeah, we do believe that, we were specifically created to make sure that those audit findings are solved, not just for Navy ERP, but for a lot of other financial management systems that have those findings in common.
And potentially the novel piece there is, there are a number of ways to prioritize what you're trying to do within a transformation. So where to start? We started there with NIST because of the auditability piece, but we are doing work that applies across the arena, and we're cutting our teeth on a pretty big, pretty hard system with a lot of span. We're also doing pilots with smaller ones. And so this is one example where you take one use case, but we're talking about infrastructure that should be a Rubik's Cube of reorientation. So as we learn lessons there, we're going to learn other lessons other places, but we 100% can do once and leverage repeatedly.
Another thing I wanted to make sure we got to is some of the underlying technologies that you're using for identity and other parts of the Zero Trust implementation. I think it's fair to say that in the commercial world, you know, identity technologies are quite a bit further along than they were when everybody did CAC back in 2006, 2007, whenever it was. How much have you been able to take off the shelf and just use to build things like NIS, and has that taught you anything about the rest of what you might be able to do for your zero trust implementation more broadly?
I'll go ahead and start with NIS. We are actually, Navy Identity Services is made up of 4 different commercial off-the-shelf products. We're using CyberArk for privileged access management. We're using Radiant Logic as our global identity directory for the Navy. We're using the Ping Identity product as our identity provider and authenticator. And we're also using SailPoint as our identity management module, thing that implements the workflows and enforces the policies that we have.
And either Justin or Lewis, does it kind of look like commercial technologies might be able to play a, you know, outsized role in building out the rest of the Dawn's zero trust model, even though it's a vastly complex project across the Department of the Navy?
Right. We know that just like love, you can't buy zero trust, but a lot of people will sell you different products along the way. So from a process perspective, one of the things that we're doing to funnel everyone is we have modern service delivery attributes, and we're sharing those with the community at large to say, hey, come ready to play. We want to do COTS first. Give us a reason to do that and configure minimally so that we're not integrating across the board. So far, like Kurt said, we've had a lot of success with that on NIS, and then bringing in other capabilities, as well as the interop between NIS and our other functional portfolio work is going to be key. So as we roll out Naval Digital Platform, as we roll out different aspects of the portfolios that we're currently testing, we're allowing for leap ahead technologies, both from the commercial world based on some specification, as well as the USD R&E, some of those big moonshot type experiments to land in our portfolio, and measuring that objectively in terms of impact and return on investment, as opposed to only kind of paying retail last minute along the way. So that's a big shift, and that's a set of partnerships that are relatively new and are working very well to speed us up so far.
Getting down to our last 7 or 8 minutes here, you guys have given us some great information on the identity piece of this. I want to make sure we go a little bit broader before we run out of time, and talk a bit more about what else is happening in the Department of the Navy in the zero trust space. So for either you, Lewis or Justin, can you give us a little bit of an intro on some of the other piece parts that are happening beyond identity with zero trust right now?
Yeah, from a kind of policy and strategy perspective, we started off with our first Zero Trust Technical Exchange meeting, or TEM, last summer. Had, I think, upwards of 200 people participating in that. We're working really closely with the DoD Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office, as well as DISA, on all their strategy and solution components. So we're really thinking about this holistically. Like Justin said, we started with some financially relevant systems under audit NFRs, but in parallel, we're working with the Marine Corps across their use cases, financial and tactical, as well as Navy tactical systems that have to operate in that disconnected environment. And we're really looking across the 7 pillars of zero trust. So we're thinking about networks and software-defined wide area networks, talking with DISA on their Thunderdome project. We're thinking about SIEM and SOAR in terms of gathering and sensor data and automation and creating that command center capability. We're looking at data tagging and data loss prevention and data rights management. So we're really looking holistically across the board. And that's when you do start to see all these things come together. They add up to a wholesale reconception of how we deliver IT services. And Justin.
Yep. And so from a device perspective, for example, Lewis and I, like you mentioned, we're both using Azure Virtual Desktop, which allows a device that is not a government furnished device to use the same resources that we otherwise would, but with a longer path to hardware. So these are examples where we're trying to beta sooner and then get that out to the other syscoms and the fleet. So just last week we talked about scaling opportunities and kind of took a straw poll on who wants that, and the syscoms seem excited about making use. So that's one case. In general, the model we're looking at is if it doesn't need to be a PEO digital led experiment, but if there are experiments across Department of Navy or pilots, prototypes otherwise, or larger, we're evaluating them against our customer-centric criteria for what people want to see and what makes this a lower friction, higher performance experience with the user in mind. And so that is driving which experiments come to the forefront sooner. It's based on return on investment. And so we talked earlier about one of the 7 pillars, which is automation and orchestration. Looking at what are the best returns on investment for those automation pieces enabled by NIST and across the board. That's something that we've rack and stacked based on data from Flank Speed. Here are the friction points. Here are the bottlenecks in the system, and we're attacking those one by one in rank order sequence, which is pretty impressive from a DoD perspective in terms of time to data hunt and then execute and solve. So you're going to see those on a monthly and quarterly basis in terms of enhancements rolled out.
And even doing zero trust for one military service is enough, pretty hard. Obviously 2 services within the Dawn, and I think the Navy and the Marine Corps have fairly different approaches to how they think about their network, even though, as I understand it, the Navy's trying to move more toward a single unified logical view of its own network. Marines are kind of already there, though. Do those 2 different approaches make this hard, and what other considerations does that create as you try to build kind of one zero trust approach for the entire Dawn?
I don't think it makes it hard. I think that the Marine Corps has done outstanding things and in many respects is ahead of the Navy on some of these modernization topics. And when we talk about the return on investment Justin mentioned, we measure that in terms of the customer experience and the operational resilience. And I think the Marine Corps has some great thinking in that regard. So all it really does is make us be very serious about articulating that return. If there is really a return there, users get better ability to get their job done. We're more resilient against a certain range of operational threats, then there's no issue there. Everyone sees that and it just speaks for itself. And if that case isn't there, then say, well, maybe this particular argument was only PowerPoint deep. And, again, that speaks for itself. So, I think it's been great in terms of bringing people together and getting a broader dialogue, which is helping everyone learn and improve.
Yep. And to that point, partnerships are all at the end of the day about people. There are exceptional technical people at the Marine Corps as well as the Navy. And so when solutions, especially early stage solutions, are put forward, we're looking at that as a joint team that says, hey, what makes the most sense for both of us together? From a JRSS replacement perspective, there are activities that we're doing across the board to de-risk that. And we're going to be transparent and we're going to make the decision based on what is the fastest and best solution here. We're setting up an architecture that's modular enough that we can make those type of decisions, build on them, and along the lines of, from a services perspective, API economy, and at the foundational perspective, how do we align these goals? Tech is moving fast enough that it solves some of the problems that you used to be political standstills at brown desks 10 years ago. So we have some of the greenfield activities to thank for that.
Down to our last minute or so, and I guess where I want to leave this is, can you just give folks some sense of the scale of the challenge ahead and how long it's going to take until we have something that you can credibly call a zero trust environment, understanding that this is not a destination, you're going to be on this journey for the foreseeable future, but how big, how difficult, how long in terms of time horizon until we can start to see some of the elements here really, really, really emerge?
Well, I think we're already there for our initial zero trust environment with flying speed. It really brings together a lot of the elements, and certainly, in my opinion, hits MVP status. It's viable. It is doing zero trust things right now that we couldn't have really thought about doing just a few years ago. And now that NIST has deployed and is starting to really scale, it's deepening and broadening many of those capabilities from a policy engine perspective, from an ABAC perspective. The challenge from a scale perspective, of course, is the sheer number of applications and data sets and functional communities and user communities that will need to be integrated, not just at a basic level, but at a robust level. That will certainly be an ongoing project. And I don't know that we've got a date, but I think we're already off to a running start, and we're only going to get faster from here.
And so to that point, scaling is hard. Scaling often gets harder if you take it slow. So we do have some momentum. One of the keys right now is building on the investment and the partnerships that we've already harvested. There's like I said before, a really strong leadership alignment across Don with Aaron Weiss as CIO and DoD John Sherman, as well as the sharing that's going on at the SME level across all of the services. So if we're leaning forward as hard as we have been, then you're going to see improvements, noticeable, important improvements every year, and we can't let that go. What industry is allowing us to do, and if we have those doer type vendors who are taking responsibility and really driving us hard, and Kurt has corralled that with NIST, and in some cases we see we can go faster than we thought we could, and we expect more of that.
All right. We are going to need to leave it there just for time. I really appreciate you all for joining us. That was Justin Finelli, the technical director at PEO Digital. Also with us, Lewis Coplin, deputy CTO at the Department of the Navy, and Curtis Parker, the lead engineer for Naval Identity Services. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And I'm Jared Serbu. Thanks again for joining us for our inaugural Zero Trust Exchange. Now we'll send it back to the studio.